It's been a little over a decade since the last mainline entry into the Devil May Cry franchise released, and the gaming industry has changed substantially since then. We've witnessed video games shift from a niche hobby to a multi-million-dollar juggernaut that has completely usurped film and literature as the world's most popular form of entertainment. While the medium has made substantial strides culturally, critically gaming has been oscillating between stagnation for the sake of appeal and innovation for the sake of artistry. Although the technologies that are used to create video games has continuously evolved over the years, the design choices that developers have decided to employ in their titles has become elementary and puerile. It is often the case that the video games that are the most critically acclaimed for their advanced technology, well-written characters, and excellent voice acting are also the ones that are the most severely lacking in terms of mechanical complexity, level design, and gameplay depth. Unfortunately, since the initial release of Devil May Cry 4, the industry trend has become story over gameplay, causing many classic franchises to shed their once strongly defined identities for the sake of accessibility. Nowhere was this paradigm shift felt more thoroughly than in the Devil May Cry franchise, since Capcom decided that a reboot was necessary for the series to remain culturally relevant and financially lucrative. To the dismay of many longtime fans of the franchise, Devil May Cry became a bastardized shell of its former glory, stripped of all of its charm, personality, and depth by developers who were far more interested in satisfying their own fragile egos than creating a title worthy of the legacy that the series had built up to that point. After the reboot's abysmal failure from a narrative, gameplay, and financial perspective, it was unclear as to whether or not Capcom would continue the series, and if they did, in what way would the series be continued? Would Capcom double down and allow Ninja Theory's reboot to continue to drag the series into irrelevancy? Or would Capcom go back to basics and revive the classic franchise that fans had been clamoring for? Rumors and speculation about a continuation of the series had been pervasive over the years, however, nothing substantial was announced, that is, until E3 2018, where Devil May Cry 5 was finally presented to the world. With claims that DMC5 would be the greatest title in the franchise's history, the developers at Capcom set out to make a game specifically for longtime fans of the series, where lingering plot threads were finally resolved, gameplay systems were finally expanded upon in unique and natural ways, and where familiar and much beloved characters finally made their triumphant return to the spotlight after a decade-long hiatus. Longtime series director Hideaki Itsuno assured fans that DMC5 would not only meet their expectations, but it would also exceed them with ease. Classic Devil May Cry was finally back, and I can confidently say that Itsuno wasn't exaggerating when he made those bold claims. Devil May Cry 5 may very well be the pinnacle of not only the Devil May Cry series, but also the hack and slash genre in and of itself, dethroning its progenitors in some of the most unique, surprising, and stylish ways possible. Occurring several years after Nero and Dante successfully defeated the Order of the Sword, a mysterious demon tree suddenly appears in the middle of Redgrave City. Attacking innocent civilians and draining them of their blood, the young devil hunter Nero takes it upon himself to destroy the root cause of this mysterious phenomena in a last-ditch effort to not only save the city, but to also regain a power that was stolen from him. Devil May Cry 5's narrative is perhaps the most complex and ambitious in the series' history, weaving an interesting tale about the consequences of a pursuit of power. Each of the three lead characters is hell-bent on attaining power by almost any means necessary, and are slowly corrupted by this pursuit of strength over the course of the story, giving life to the old axiom, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. This corruption manifests itself in distinctive ways in each of the lead protagonists. Through Nero, we can see how attempting to expunge feelings of inadequacy can cause one to become resentful and unhinged. Through V, we can understand how the demons of our past can assiduously deter us from any sense of hope for a brighter future. And through Dante, we can learn how our arrogance can cause us to become callous and detached from the world around us. Each of the characters has their sense of pride shattered and must learn how to overcome this crisis of identity before they can truly vanquish both the parasitic demon tree and the overwhelming strength of the demon king Urizen. Ostensibly, Devil May Cry 5 may seem like just another dumb story about wisecracking heroes and weird tentacle monsters, but very much like Devil May Cry 3, there is a surprising amount of subtlety in the storytelling here that is both layered and genuinely thoughtful. Even the destruction of Redgrave City at the hands of the Demon Tree can be interpreted as a metaphor for the unraveling of each of the lead characters' facades at the behest of their family tree. There's a reason that blood plays such a prominent role in the narrative, as there are plenty of moments where the lead characters are literally drenched in it, indicating that no matter how antagonistic they are toward one another, they will always be connected and must learn to accept each other and their lineage in order to finally overcome their personal demons. While DMC5's narrative tackles a variety of heavy themes including redemption, identity, and family, it can also be interpreted as a character study of sorts, giving us new insights into these much beloved characters by exploring how some of their greatest strengths are paradoxically some of their most pernicious shortcomings. There's plenty of content here to dissect that is deep and layered. However, in spite of its heavy themes, the narrative somehow never feels preachy, pretentious, or self-indulgent. This isn't to say that the narrative doesn't have its fair share of issues, especially during the latter half of the story where certain plot threads feel a bit rushed, awkward, and unwarranted, but it is to say that the developers were keenly aware of what makes a great Devil May Cry story and have masterfully scripted a narrative that will satisfy both newcomers and veterans alike. The narrative never takes itself too seriously and makes sure to keep the excitement high through what are easily some of the greatest action scenes ever presented in a video game. Whether it's Nero killing demons in slow motion during the title sequence, V reciting poetry before striking a boss with a killing blow, or Dante showing off with a newly acquired devil arm, the cutscenes are ingeniously directed and choreographed and are absolutely brimming with the style that only a title in the Devil May Cry series could ever produce. It's fair to say that the presentation in DMC5 is a technical masterpiece that is impressive both graphically and stylistically. The level of detail on each of the characters, environments, and enemies are second to none, and the fact that the developers were able to create a game with such a high level of graphical fidelity without sacrificing the frame rate in the process is truly impressive. By and large, the frame rate maintains itself at 60 on console for about 95% of the time. However, there are certain areas where frame rate dips can occur, even on the Xbox One X. These frame rate drops aren't too intrusive for the most part, but considering that this is a title that's all about precision and proficiency, it can definitely cause certain enemy encounters to feel cheap and unremarkable as a result. You may find yourself jumping, dodging, or attacking a split second too late because of a random frame rate fluctuation causing you to take unnecessary damage, and if you're attempting no damage runs of these missions, it can be a massive headache to have to restart from the beginning due to technical failures that are outside of your control. The camera can also exacerbate this issue to a ludicrous degree, as many of the enemies in DMC5 are quite massive and won't hesitate to swarm the player character at any chance that they get. Sometimes attempting to switch the targeting reticule between the various demons during gameplay can cause both the camera and player character to become confused. There are instances where you'll find yourself targeting enemies that you have zero intention of attacking because of drop button inputs and delayed reactions caused by the frame rate issues. There are also certain enemy encounters where your largest hurdle will be the camera itself, as it fails to frame the action on screen in a way that is clear and conducive to player aptitude. The camera has always been one of the Devil May Cry series' biggest issues, and while DMC5's camera isn't the worst that the series has to offer, it can definitely feel like a step back from prior titles in certain regards. But altogether, the developers have placed all of the tools for success into your hands, and you are solely responsible for what happens during combat, barring some technical hiccups here and there. Outside of these minor issues, the core gameplay of Devil May Cry 5 is the greatest in the series' history, allowing for a level of player freedom and creativity that hasn't been seen since DMC4 released almost a decade ago. Even though DMC5 is missing certain upper-level mechanics from prior titles such as reversals and inertia, in terms of the number of core combat options available to the player at any given moment, DMC5 is unrivaled. Featuring 3 unique characters with individualized combat styles, missions, and abilities, there is plenty of variety to experience here, from V's unique familiars, to Dante's nearly limitless combo potential, to Nero's Exceed and Devil Breaker mechanics. Each character has a wealth of abilities and attacks to choose from, which have been designed to be distinct without feeling foreign or out of place in a Devil May Cry title. The character who strays furthest from the DMC formula is series newcomer V, who uses a far more passive playstyle that is contingent upon summoning familiars in order to do battle against enemies and bosses. Since V has a frail frame that isn't built for combat, he must use summons to nullify the threats that he comes across during his campaign. V has 3 familiars at his disposal: Griffin, who grants V access to a variety of projectile attacks from the air, Shadow, who allows V to combo enemies on the ground, and Nightmare, who acts as V's Devil Trigger equivalent. Each familiar plays an integral role in keeping V alive during combat and are equipped with a number of combos, passive abilities, and charge attacks. V can also use his familiars to maneuver himself around environments. Griffin will allow V to double jump and glide for short periods of time, Shadow allows V to quickly strafe in order to dodge enemy attacks, and Nightmare allows V to access its full power by climbing on top of its back and taking manual control over its actions while Devil Trigger is activated. Learning how to manipulate each of V's summons during combat scenarios may be somewhat cumbersome at first, but after a little bit of practice you will be able to inflict an extraordinary amount of damage to enemies in some of the most stylish ways that the franchise has to offer. Since V is meant to keep his distance from his adversaries, his gameplay makes you feel as though you are a conductor for a symphony of absolute chaos and havoc. V's taunts excellently reflect this fact, as he will pantomime playing a violin, conducting an orchestra, and even singing into a microphone, leading to some of the most over-the-top displays of power that an action game has ever presented. While V's gameplay style is brimming with excellent ideas and mechanical depth, it's fair to say that his gameplay is easily the weakest aspect of DMC5, and in certain ways actually detracts from the experience in its entirety. The way that V's familiars operate during combat is somewhat baffling, as V doesn't have complete control over how they maneuver around the battlefield. Once V locks onto an enemy, his familiars will naturally target it and run near the enemy in question so as to optimally position themselves to strike. However, V has to be a certain distance from demons for his familiars to react in this way, because if he is too far from a targeted enemy, his familiars will prioritize staying near V as opposed to closing the distance between them and the targeted enemy or boss. Even if they're in the middle of attacking, once their combo is completed, they will automatically teleport to V's side, which can lead to some extremely cumbersome and frustrating combat scenarios. Exacerbating this issue even further is the fact that V's familiars have life bars and can actually be knocked out during battle, and of course the familiars aren't completely under the control of the player, which means that they don't always take the optimal path toward enemies and won't always attack when or even how you want them to. There are plenty of instances where the familiars can get stuck on certain environmental geometry as well as demons, and there can even be instances where the familiars will completely ignore all of your directives unless you reset their positions by double jumping and strafing. V's boss battles illustrate the worst that his gameplay has to offer, in particular the boss battle with Geryon. Since Geryon is such an agile boss, positioning V's slow-moving familiars can sometimes be an absolute nightmare, and overall the scenario regresses into a mind-numbing battle of attrition. You'll oftentimes find yourself roaming around boss arenas reading V's book in order to increase his devil triggers so that Nightmare can be summoned. Furthermore, each of V's familiars has a painfully limited moveset, and V never gains access to brand new familiars or weapons over the course of the campaign, making his gameplay style feel stale and formulaic by the time the story has concluded. Despite his limited moveset, if the developers had allowed players access to an ability which teleports the familiars to and from targeted enemies, many of V's gameplay issues would be ameliorated completely. By and large, V's gameplay is passable, and some of his gameplay issues can be circumvented by simply brute forcing your way through his missions. However, passable is not good enough for a Devil May Cry game. There are moments during V's combat scenarios where the brilliance that the developers were hoping to achieve reveals itself to you in a beautiful crescendo of anarchy and style. However, these moments are few and far between, and you will oftentimes find yourself battling against positioning his familiars about as much as you find yourself battling against his enemies and bosses. V's combat system is an excellent schematic for a gameplay style with a wealth of mechanical potential, and perhaps a future entry in the series could expand upon these systems to create something truly special, but as it stands currently, V's gameplay leaves much to be desired and feels weak, hollow, and unremarkable. While the developers may have failed to make V's gameplay worthy of the Devil May Cry name, where they have truly succeeded is in how much they've been able to improve and refine Nero's combat mechanics. In DMC4, Nero was a character who did a great job of introducing new players to Devil May Cry's gameplay systems without completely sacrificing mechanical depth. The introduction of the Devil Bringer, Exceed, and Max Sack mechanics made for a character who was versatile and nuanced. However, the character was extremely lacking in terms of options and never really grew over the course of the game outside of receiving a Devil Trigger a few missions into the campaign. In order to mitigate this issue, the developers decided to expand Nero's Devil Bringer mechanic from DMC4 by introducing various Devil Breakers, which are mechanical arms that Nero can fasten to himself to gain numerous attacks and abilities. There are about a dozen different Devil Breakers that Nero can use, which range in function and utility from being able to slow time, use projectile homing attacks, rocket surf, amplify the attack power of the Red Queen and Blue Rose, heal, and even use Buster-like attacks from DMC4. Each of the breakers also has around 2 to 3 abilities which can vary depending on whether or not they're activated on the ground or in the air, and all of them have devastating single-use charge attacks that, once activated, will destroy the Devil Breaker and force Nero to equip a new one. The Devil Breakers can also be manually destroyed at any time by the player, which can cause a fair amount of damage to enemies and gives Nero access to invincibility invincibility frames for a brief few moments. Experimenting with the Devil Breakers and their various options in addition to mastering jump cancelling, Exceed, and the Max Axe systems expands Nero's gameplay substantially. Players can also unlock the ability to equip Nero with up to 8 different Devil Breakers at a time, which can lead to some truly impressive combinations that will have demons flying around each of the combat arenas like ragdolls. The moveset for Nero's Red Queen has also been expanded upon in some truly ingenious ways, which allows players to more stylishly close the distance between Nero and his enemies. These brand new attacks feel like natural extensions of his DMC4 moveset and go a long way in helping the combat flow more organically. Building even further upon these options are the Blue Rose's brand new charge shots, which can cause multiple hits of damage at once, and Nero's brand new Devil Trigger, which extends his combat mechanics even further. Once Nero's Devil Trigger has been unleashed, his Devil Bringer makes its triumphant return and can be used in conjunction with his Devil Breakers to wreak havoc on enemies and bosses. While the developers have done an incredible job fleshing out Nero's gameplay, there are a few areas where it could have been expanded upon even further in order to really push the character to his limits. Even though Nero gains access to an impressive number of Devil Breakers in DMC5, he never actually receives any new guns or swords, which means that he is still stuck with the Blue Rose and Red Queen for the duration of the campaign. The Devil Breakers do a great job of spicing up Nero's core mechanics, and even though those base mechanics are well designed and implemented, they can become quite stale, especially for those of us who have spent the last decade playing with these same exact options in DMC4. Then there's the fact that the Devil Breakers cannot be swapped on the fly and must be destroyed before Nero can switch between them. Apparently the game devs toyed with the idea of allowing for on-the-fly Devil Breaker switching, but ultimately decided against the idea because they wanted to distinguish Nero's Devil Bringers from Dante's styles. Unfortunately, this decision, while not at all detrimental to Nero's combat, lowers his skill ceiling substantially, as being able to switch between the Devil Breakers at will would have produced some truly mind-blowing options for players to experiment with. While I do understand the reasoning that the developers used to justify the exclusion of on-the-fly Devil Breaker switching, I don't agree with it. Nero's base mechanics are already a more accessible version of Dante's outside of Exceed and Max Axe, so allowing Devil Breakers to be swapped on the fly would have been the perfect way to bridge the gap between the two characters and allow players to more easily grasp Dante's gameplay. Notwithstanding, Nero has definitely become a fully fleshed out character in his own right and has innumerable options to experiment with, which are deeply layered and satisfying to master. However, where DMC5 truly shines and where the vast majority of its excellence can be found is with the series' poster boy and greatest character of all time, the legendary son of Sparta, Dante. DMC5's incarnation of Dante is easily the greatest in the series' history, providing players with an unparalleled moveset that is as stylish as it is nuanced. Using his DMC4 mechanics as a basis, the developers have sagaciously expanded upon many of the attributes that made Dante an absolute force to be reckoned with by creating some truly unique and surprising devil arms, devil triggers, and style functions. The collection of devil arms in DMC5 is probably the most unique and dynamic set in the series' history, featuring everything from a stylish hat that is powered by red orbs, to a demon motorcycle that can be split in half and dual wielded, to even a set of nunchucks that can morph into different weapons on the fly. What makes these instruments stand out when compared to prior entries in the franchise is the fact that a single weapon can contain multiple movesets that are completely distinct from one another. For example, the Balrog, which are Dante's gauntlets, have 2 modes of attack. A punching function which allows Dante to unleash a barrage of quick punches, dodges, and uppercuts, and a kicking function which allows Dante to acrobatically flip kick and breakdance. Being able to switch between these 2 modes within a single weapon provides players with a surprisingly vast number of options to experiment with, and that isn't even taking into account switching between the other devil arms and of course style switching in and of itself. Dante's 4 primary styles from DMC 3 and 4 have naturally made their return here, with a few minor tweaks which help in making them more accessible to new players. For example, Royal Guard, which is perhaps the most powerful style in the series, has always been the most difficult to master because it is high risk, high reward. In order to gain the most out of Royal Guard, players must intentionally place themselves into harm's way and perfectly guard enemy attacks with frame-perfect precision so that Dante can absorb energy. In prior titles, if a player's timing was a bit off, Dante would take chip damage, or if they were completely off, they would take full damage that could easily cause frustration in less skilled players. In DMC5, instead of taking actual chip damage from mistimed guards, Dante's DT meter will take the hit and deplete slightly. This meager shift in functionality allows players to learn to time their guards without the inhibiting penalty found in prior titles. However, if players recklessly deplete all of their DT meter in the midst of guarding, they will begin to take chip damage, adding another layer of strategy to how guarding is used without completely mitigating the risk factor. Each of the styles has received small tweaks like this, making them more kinesthetically pleasing, allowing Dante's gameplay to shine like never before. Adding even more layers to these mechanics is Dante's Devil Trigger, which will completely change the way that certain attacks are executed, and may even endow extra secondary effects to weapons and abilities. There isn't a single weapon or style in Dante's arsenal that isn't brimming with mechanical complexity, and to say that Dante's combat mechanics are the greatest that the hack and slash genre has ever produced would be an understatement. Not content with simply giving Dante an assortment of guns, swords, and styles, the developers opted to go one step further and provide Dante with a second Devil Trigger which unleashes his full power onto the battlefield. This Sin Devil Trigger can be activated once Dante has built up enough normal Devil Trigger energy to fill his Sin Devil Trigger gauge. Once the gauge is full, Dante will impale himself with his sword and become a demigod that is nearly invulnerable and all-powerful. The Sin Devil Trigger can be utilized in a variety of ways. Less skilled players will likely use it as a crutch to help them escape from areas that they're having particular difficulty with. However, more advanced players will learn that the Sin Devil Trigger has an extremely powerful mechanic attached to it that takes the concept of the DT burst from DMC3 and expands upon it substantially. In Devil May Cry 3, players could hold down the Devil Trigger button to build up energy, which could be unleashed upon enemies at any point during combos and inflict massive damage. In DMC5, once the Sin DT meter is full, players can hold down the DT button to build up Dante's energy. Under normal circumstances, letting go of the button after the buildup is completed will simply cause Dante to unleash his Sin DT until all of his energy is depleted and he transforms back into his normal form. However, if the energy is built up while Dante is in the middle of a triple S rank combo, Dante can instantly activate and deactivate the Sin Devil Trigger at will for a limited time without depleting the meter, allowing him to unleash powerful moves in the midst of his combos without breaking the gameplay flow, leading to even more damage, combo potential, and style points. Highly skilled players will be able to take full advantage of the Sin DT and use it in conjunction with Dante's styles and various weapons, and build upon them even further with the upper level mechanics such as jump cancelling to create some truly awe-inspiring gameplay that is beyond compare in the genre. The number of weapons that Dante can equip at a time has also been expanded from 6 to 8, and once the campaign is completed, Dante can actually be equipped with 6 guns and 7 swords at the same time, which can all be selected on the fly during gameplay. While the option to equip such a vast array of weapons may seem impressive initially, in reality the option comes across more so as a novelty because outside of the primary 4 swords and 4 guns, the rest of the weapons are essentially palette swaps of one another with very little difference in function and utility. Unlike in DMC4 where Dante was forced to use all 6 weapons at the same time, DMC5 allows players to extend or limit the number of weapons that Dante has at his disposal. Players can even decide to go into missions equipped with absolutely nothing and attempt to simply royal guard their way through any opposition impeding their progress. While Dante's gameplay is without question the pinnacle of what the genre has to offer, these mechanics on their own wouldn't mean very much if they weren't properly contextualized through great enemy design, level design, and boss battles. Thankfully, the developers learned from their mistakes with DMC4 and created missions that are unique for each character. There is very little backtracking and the environments are beautifully detailed and impressive to look at. The enemy design has also been improved substantially since DMC4, as there are no cheap enemies akin to the Chimera, Enigmas, or the Fallen to deal with. The vast majority of DMC5's demons are unique and take design inspiration from each of the prior titles in the series that longtime fans of the franchise will be excited to see. Each of the protagonists also gets to do battle with their own unique bosses, which are some of the most intense and fun fights in the series. There is plenty of variety to be found here, and thankfully there is only one mission in the game where 3 of the bosses are recycled for plot reasons. Then there's the implementation of one of the very few features that DMC Devil May Cry had that the classic franchise didn't, which is a fully featured practice mode called the Void. The Void works very much akin to a practice mode that can be found in a modern fighting game, which allows players to pit their skills against various practice dummies to their heart's content. The Void is a mode that players can easily sink hours of their lives into by simply trying to perfect combos, royal guard timing, max act timing, and everything else in between. The Void on its own gives DMC5 almost limitless replay value as there is almost no end to the number of combos that can be thought up. Bloody Palace also makes a return and actually features a unique unlock for each of the characters if you can complete it. While the overall game design of DMC5 is competently constructed, there are a few areas where it falters, especially when compared to previous titles in the series. Even though each of the characters has access to their own unique missions, the art design within the missions themselves can become somewhat repetitive as you make your way through the umpteenth dilapidated cityscape. Then there's the awkwardly handled multiplayer mode, which allows players to meet other devil hunters along their journey, but mostly from a distance. There are very few places where players can actually meet together in an arena and take on enemies together, which is an absolute shame because in the very few instances that this is possible, it can lead to some of the most exciting, fun, and hilarious gameplay that the series has to offer. Not having proper multiplayer functionality for at least the Bloody Palace mode was a huge missed opportunity that I hope will be ameliorated sometime in the future. The lack of any kind of substantial completion unlocks outside of the super costumes is also a detriment. DMC 1, 2, and 3 featured a variety of costumes that players could unlock after completion, but DMC 5 simply features a few pre-order bonus palette swaps that aren't much to look at. The way that mission rankings work is quite counterintuitive as well, especially on Must Die mode, where certain enemy spawns must be skipped entirely in order to gain perfect S rank for a mission. This runs counter to what Devil May Cry is all about, as taking on some of these disparate enemy spawns will cause your mission style ranking to decrease because there won't be enough enemies in the vicinity to increase your style meter to an S, meaning that your overall style points will be penalized. It's definitely a strange system to wrap your head around at first, but it can easily be exploited once you understand how it works. Then there's Virgil. Devil May Cry 5 is essentially a character study of Virgil, and yet he isn't an unlockable character in the game. While there is a high likelihood that he will be playable in a future DLC update or even a re-release special edition version of DMC5, he absolutely should have been an unlockable character in the base game because his absence here is difficult to overlook. Despite a few design flaws here and there, Devil May Cry 5 is not only a love letter to the fans of the series, but a celebration of just about everything that makes this franchise such an important milestone in gaming history. Devil May Cry is the game series that has been defining the standards for all action games since its inception back in 2001, and now here in 2019 the series continues to show the industry exactly how action games can push the medium forward through unparalleled and unapologetic mechanical complexity. This is a series that has thrived on the merits of its core gameplay in spite of its game quality wavering somewhat erratically over the years. It is a testament to the strength of its core mechanics, engaging characters, excellent art design, and boundless potential that the series has been able to survive where any lesser franchise would have faded into obscurity. For many of us, the idea of a Devil May Cry 5 was little more than a pipe dream, a meager hope in the minds of fans who refused to give up on the series that wasn't merely just another video game franchise to them, but a substantial and ineffable part of their lives, hearts, and souls. Devil May Cry 5 is the product of a culmination of over a decade of the hopes and dreams of fans everywhere, provided to us by developers whose passion, love, and admiration for the series shines through with every design decision implemented, for better or worse. It is an absolute triumph of old school game design consolidating with modern technology that makes for an experience that is unlike any other. With an incredible soundtrack, beautiful graphics, excellent art design, impressive set pieces, layered gameplay, infinite replay value, and badass characters, there isn't a game that has released since DMC4 that comes anywhere near the greatness that this title exhibits on all cylinders. It is with great pleasure that I say that Devil May Cry is finally back, and Devil May Cry 5 is without question the greatest action game ever made. After a decade-long wait, I think we finally have a winner.